Hello.
Hey, lovely to see you.
How are you?
Mm, yeah, I'm good.
We
I'm good.
to dive straight in and get talking about your exciting show at Sight Gallery, if that's okay
Yeah,
with you.
yeah, of course,
So how
of
did it go?
course. Well, it was a bit crazy because we opened a couple of weeks before lockdown started.
Oh,
So,
crikey.
so, so it was like I was working on that show for about a year, and then lockdown happens. Um, yeah, but the good news is that I think, so what are we now? We're June now, right? So um I think Sight will be, it was supposed to come down, so it was supposed to be February, March, April, May, the show. So realistically it's supposed to have like like be installed and down, but of course it's not. And luckily they're shifting back their program, so I think it's going to reopen and then be um, September, October, November, and then come down in December. So Anne Helliker, who's the curator there, has been really great at figuring out how it can how it can continue. So it's actually
Yeah.
probably going to reopen in September. So we only had 2 or 3 weeks of it being open. Which was also like, I kind of at that point was just like, okay, if that's all we get, that's all we get, kind of thing. But it's fantastic that it's going to be open again. Yeah. So
So you can
that's
do
good.
double the promotion, get more people
So
to go and see it.
get more
When
people to go
people are
see it.
itching to see it. That's really
Yeah.
good to hear, actually, how other galleries what they're planning to do with their programs. I thought so they're just putting it on pause and then moving everything sort of
Yeah.
down. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a really good time for them to reflect on, just have time internally for them as staff as well to figure out what they want. Because I think that there's such a I know that we've chatted about this a little bit before, but there's such a culture of like just zooming through works and programs, and there being a big pressure on output and showing the Arts Council that you're like doing all this stuff and blah 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 blah. And I think it's really important that loads of galleries at the moment are really reflecting. So I think I'm really chuffed they're going to do that. So that
Yeah.
feels really good. And it also feels pretty epic because, like, I guess the first solo show or solo support from an artist run space that I had was with you guys. And so it's like, and it's a very different, like, just space wise, it's such a
Different
different
scale, right?
scale.
Yeah.
This is such a different scale because
Yeah.
it's such a huge space, and it's their first time that space has been opened, because it's not their new rebuild of that gallery. It's probably, I think I'm probably right in saying it's about 3 years old. I might be wrong with that. It might be a bit older, and it's such a large space. So it's a lot to think about in terms of where that works
Have
sits.
they moved or redone up their space or something?
They had, so I think the way that it worked is that they had the project space, uh, what's now the project space was their gallery space, and then they had this big capital development and extended their building to make this really large, like it's 12 meters by 18 meters, concrete floor
12 by
galleries.
18. Flipping heck.
So it was quite so it was really, it was quite ambitious deciding to make to specifically make, I've got some images of the work that I can show you as well, but to specifically make the floor work that I made in that space was it's really big. So
Wow.
it's
Should we have a look at the photos of it?
of course, let
Can
me
you share
see.
your screen from there, or do I have to
Yeah,
do something?
no, I think I can do it.
Yeah, just press the
um
green button.
I'm using a PowerPoint that I used for a talk that I did recently.
Cool.
So
Nice.
we'll zoom through. We might,
I'll
I'll
just
jump back
do
in.
in your order. That's fine. Yeah.
Oh, don't worry. We'll. Oh no, host us to stay. You have to let me.
I have to make you, so I
You.
thought that might
Yeah.
happen. Um, Phoebe. I don't know how to do it. Oh, good. That should be good.
Yeah. Let's see what works.
Yeah.
Is that worked?
Brilliant. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. So yeah, it was 21st of, it was going to be 21st of Feb to 17th of May, which feels ages ago. Also, I'm sorry if the sound, like, I'm currently in a loft space and it started raining. So if you suddenly get a lot of, like, see, like it started hailing. Oh my God. Anyway, so if you get a lot of sounds, apologies, it's the roof. Okay. So yeah, so this is so this is the install space at site. And there's three works that exist in this space. So the original floor is actually like a concrete polished floor, and so everything that you see on the floor is laid on top, if that makes sense. So there's a installation that's a floor work that runs the whole of the gallery that we're looking at now, and then there's and that installation, that floor work is called Defensive Drills 1. And then there is a sound work that you can see from the speakers. So there's a 7.1 sounds piece that it's the first time that I've worked in surround sound. So that sound piece can be it was really exciting to do in the space, and also had its challenges, because obviously when making sound work, you only can do so much until you're actually in the install to figure out how the acoustics are going to work in the space. So
especially when it's 7.1, so it's like traveling around the whole 7 speakers independently, right? Is that
exactly.
Yeah. Wow.
Exactly. And so that's a 17-minute sound piece, and the sound piece also is made in design with the lighting, the scenography, the lighting design. So a fantastic thing that I was able to work with site is that they Angelica and Aaron is their technical producer, and Angelica is the curator. They just enabled the full lighting system to be controlled. So when you move through, so this is another angle of the show, but as you see, when you move through the show, the lighting also responds to the sound piece. So we were able to totally change, and it does, totally change the temperature or the lighting of the room. Was designed, again, a lot of this happened when we were actually installing. Like I had my initial ideas of how it was going to run, and then obviously you're working with how these spots and fluorescence are going to work in the space, but enabled you to move between different temperatures and lighting designs, depending.
So when you say temperature, you mean the color of the tint of the light change?
Yeah, so with the fluorescence, they're pretty much like daylight fluorescence, but you can also, you might see some spots in the ceiling, and they can, so do you see they so you
cast,
can
the color cast.
Exactly. And it probably isn't, you know what it's like as an artist, it's hugely noticeable and important for me when I was doing it, but whether or not everyone picks up those nuances is much of a muchness. So there's and that piece is called Spiral Rides and Involuntary Peaks, which is the soundscape with the scenography. And then it moves into, there's a 30-minute film work that there's a central wrestling mat. I'll explain more about the work in a sec, but there's a central wrestling mat that you see that then has this film work that I developed with a group of young female wrestlers in Norway over the last couple of years. That then
how do you seek out a young female wrestling group in Norway? That's so good.
I felt very I was very privileged to be able to work with them for such a long time, actually. And there's some totally gutting stuff about the show, the timings of the show, and COVID and lockdown, because I'd also enabled I probably should say it more professionally than this, but we've been able to blag some funding from DKUK, which is Office of Contemporary Art Norway, to be able to bring over the wrestling group to see the show.
Oh, amazing.
And it was the first
wow.
weekend when they stopped flight, you know, like everyone was on lockdown and stopped flights. So fingers crossed, if it can happen, we might be able to shift that to September. But we had this whole weekend of female, like introductory. Yeah, I know, it's really, yeah. So, and also a lot of I'll show you some more pictures of the young women I got to work with. But there's a big age range. So I'm working with women from the ages of probably 8 to 19 predominantly.
Yeah.
And so I was very excited about what it would mean for them to come and see this work also at this scale, because that projection is 8 meters wide.
Wow.
So so it's a large projection. And so this is Heather, one of the wrestlers that I was working with warming up.
What?
Yeah, I know. Yeah. And there's I'll give you some links for
That's a wrestling move.
That's a warm up, so that when they do freestyle wrestling, which means that they can there's different rules for men and women, and for the women it means that you can like attack the legs as well. And so they have to teach the young girls from a really young age to be able to stretch out their necks, so that if we think about it, like a lot of my reference points were, I guess, rugby. Like I grew up in South Wales, so thinking a lot about how, well, in particular, how I never got to play rugby as a girl growing up in South Wales, and it was really interesting watching these young women be able to learn. Like they were learning to beat the shit out of each other, you know. They're learning to be incredibly tactile and also like tender, but at the same time using a lot of physical force in their bodies from a really young age.
Yeah.
Which I was like, the first time I saw that, I was just like so excited about it. Wow. So I guess the start, maybe it's worth, sorry, I know that I'm just jumping about a lot, but maybe it's worth talking about where this body of work came from.
Yeah, because the 2017, it's been very interesting to see the work, how it's changed since 2017 when you did the show with us, which was about sort of dance and movement really of body, wasn't it? And sort of challenging sort of stereotypes of women's roles in society. You know, we had so many people just sort of blown away by that video. And it was just so simply, you'd never seen a woman over 50, 60
moving in that way,
photographed seductively, and just moving. It was so simple but so powerful.
And that was a
lot of people just instantly relate to that.
Thank you. And it was definitely a group effort to develop that work. So that was the second piece of work that I'd made with Now. Since then, we've made a lot more work together, but that was the second piece of work I'd made with Nandi Bebe, who's a choreographer, who's a choreographer and dance artist and fantastic performer. And we actually from that formalized our collaboration. So now we direct together as Bebe and Davis.
Nice.
And which is really exciting. And we've actually just finished a period of R&D that we decided to undertake in lockdown. So we were doing it virtually, working with different performers, which I'll talk a bit about later. But and I think that body of work that I made with you, definitely came off the back of a lot of research I was doing with Jenny Moore and Chloe Cooper through Bedfellows, which was a long-term project we did around radical sex education. And one of the things that came up with that was also thinking about intergenerational conversations, and so led us to do a lot of workshops and cast and work specifically with a group of women or female identifying people over 50. And so we had this fantastic group of performers who we made this short film with, that had a soundtrack and was, as you say, movement based. There was no text in that work at all, actually. And I think it definitely felt like a really important shift in my practice doing that work with you. I felt Helen, who's one of the performers, I've worked with Helen. Well, me and Nandi have worked with Helen a lot in our work, and I think often I'm quite interested in who we see on screens, in particular with video work, and in what roles they play, and what gets to be visible, I guess, or who gets to be visible.
I guess it's such a big part of how we experience culture now, isn't it?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And
news,
and it was really important having those women talk about their they spoke a lot about feeling invisible past a certain age. So like realizing that you're like, there was a great chat about realizing that you're no longer being flirted with, or you're no longer having somebody recognize your body in a way that you've taken so for granted in your you know, in your teens or your 20s or your 30s or your 40s. No matter who that person is, you realize that you are now seen as elder, you know, and often ignored or seen as other. So that was what was really exciting about making that work with you. And then so I was actually invited over to Norway to lead a residency program called Taking Hold of Double Bridge, which was headed up by Praxis, who were a international artist residency program. It's an artist run initiative in Oslo. And so I went over there to lead that for a month. And when I was there, I was really keen to also be leading and working with this fantastic group of artists in Oslo. And at the same time, I was really keen to think about using that as an opportunity to develop or think about making new work when I was there. And I'd actually spent that year recovering from an ACL, so a knee ligament injury that that happened whilst I was playing basketball. So when I turned 30, I started playing for this women, non-binary and trans inclusive basketball team in East London. And it totally, I have so much joy from playing. I used to play with Hackney Gazelles, and now I play with Hackney Rebels, and I just had so much joy from I always think about it as like using my body to be big in a way that I hadn't ever been taught permission to use before. Like I was super sporty when I was at school, but like definitely along like my journey or my identity, I got self-conscious and had consciously been maybe making myself smaller in certain spaces. And I was and now I was in a situation where I was just being taught to be bigger. Like you had to be bigger, I had to learn to block, I had to learn
that's a really nice way to think about it.
I had to learn to occupy space differently and be louder. And so I played with them. I've been playing with them for 5 years now, and whilst we were playing a late night game at at this trendy event one night, and I went over and totally ruptured my ACL ligament in my knee. That led to this huge it was really difficult, but it led to this huge amount of rehab that kind of chucked me into working a lot with physios and a lot with medics and coaches who work with sports rehabilitation, and that at the same time kind of kick-started me really thinking about contact-based sports and learning and what we learn from those athletic methodologies, in a really similar way to like working with some physiotherapists and sports medics like Dr. Alex Bomer, who I still work with, was teaching me equally the same amount as like when I worked with Nandi, who's a dancer. So just really thinking about how I was getting really excited about implementing these different methodologies from outside of potentially the arts or culture, and thinking about teaching and learning from there, from that as a point of departure in particular. So at the time I was working with people who were like basketball coaches, rugby coaches. I got to do this extended residency with an organisation called Heart of Glass in Merseyside, who they placed me working with a youth boxing team. So I was working in lots of different sports settings, and thinking a lot about documenting certain moments, or image making, or performance for camera in response to that, and also working with sounds. And so that was all happening. And then I went over to Norway and was really interested in what contact-based sports were big in Norway. I've never, I've been to Norway like once before, to Bergen Assembly, but I don't know Norwegian culture. And so Charlotte and Nick from Praxis, through conversations with them, we were talking about wrestling, and they managed to send me off to a youth wrestling club about an hour on a bus outside Oslo, in a really rural area called Kolbotn. And so I turned up at this club, and it was for the girls training session, and it was just fantastic. Like it was like 20 young women or girls between the ages of like 5 to 11, and then there was this more senior group that was pretty much like 12 to 18, and there was tons of girls in the younger group, and it was just fantastic watching them move and warm up, and their coaches work with them. And so when I was on this residency, I was going like 2 nights a week, because, like, you know, Daniel, that I come from a background of working in arts education and thinking about working off site, and so was really aware that if I wanted, even before I could have a conversation with them about thinking about if they would be interested in potentially working on something together, it was really important for me to learn more about how they worked as a team. So and also I don't speak Norwegian. They were fantastic at English, but there was definitely this like it was amazing. It was an amazing opportunity. So I got to know a lot of the coaches and the young women then, and eventually at the end of the residency we did some test filming. I made them a few different prints and zines and things like that, like just as it, like, to show, like, these are just some like presents that I gave them that just showed like certain just certain ways of me working through some of the stuff we were collecting. And of course, as you can see,
so you were just hanging out with them, photographing, getting to know them.
Yeah. Where it was appropriate, also talking to the parents, and then from there I went back 6 months later and worked with a DOP called Mata Vold, and we did an extended shoot, an interview series with them, that then ended up being the basis of this 30-minute film that kind of follows their day-to-day routines and certain stories of like lead coaches and some of the younger women when they're training. And it's not always comfortable. Like, some of the young women get very upset in the training, and there are these different moments of tension these moments of care there's these moments of care and then frustration and emotions running high in different ways. So it was a real privilege to be able to work through like that in the filming process and then in the editing process as well, really. And
how do you see yourself as like an observer floating around, or are you collaborating with them? Are they, you know, how much are they involved in the process of it? Because it's a balance you seem to tread really well. I'm interested to hear your sort of thoughts on it, and bearing in mind your background as a producer as well. And you know, the first conversation we had was about like your work and what you do in your form of paid work and artwork, and bringing all these elements together. So just be great to hear.
I think that it changes for each, like, depending on the context that I'm working in, depending on what we've set up as an exchange, it'll change as well. So sometimes I'm casting people in work in particular, which means that then they are I'm paying them to like perform within work. And in other ways, maybe I'm working in a much more extended way where we have a different type of exchange. And I think, if I'm honest, like when I was younger, I definitely chuck around language like way too freely to do with like collaboration and participation and socially engaged. Maybe like there was a different way that I talk about that like 10 to 8 years ago or even 5 years ago. And now I really feel that there's certain research that happens, and in that research stage, it's really important that that is shaped from multiple different people's perspectives, so that that I'm learning from multiple people's perspectives and being really clear that that is what I am keen to gain in that space, if that makes sense. And then I have found that the way that I want to work, and lots of artists work differently, but the way that I want to work is that that then I will take that research and those conversations and the way that we shaped some of those moments and reflected on some of those moments, but then the authorship of editing that work does sit with me. And it's taken me a really long time to trust that. And obviously wanting to look after maybe look after is the wrong way to say it. You know, respect the exchange that has existed before and continues to exist, but also know that my role what I see my role as an artist is making the response from Phoebe to that experience. And it took me a while to really feel comfortable with owning that, because I was working in different contexts that that kind of spoke about socially engaged as everything being co-authored. And similar with activism, right? Similar with organizing, is that there can be limits to how much you can make a consensus decision when you've got 30 people in the space. So what I have learned is to be really clear about what my intentions are, and then it's really straightforward. Because if I'm like, I would really like to make zine works and prints and a film from us working together. I thought these things could be interesting. Is there anything else that you also would like to could exist in there? But the editing and the process of that can sit with me. And obviously, if there's anything they're uncomfortable with, it's very important to me that isn't putting them, especially because some of these, you know, a lot of the women I was filming, they were under 18, so it's really important for them and their guardians or like caregivers to be comfortable with how they're being depicted on screen as well.
So did you run the edit by them at the end? Would you have changed it if they'd asked you to?
Would I think, well, I'm concerned about one moment of the film that they haven't had a chance to see yet, because they were going to come over right at the they've seen some rushes but they hadn't seen the full thing, and that Hedda gave us permission to film her when she was getting upset, and it's a really powerful moment. And I had some concerns about how that would feel being present in the film, but I've spoken to it a lot with her and her mum, and that she welcomed us in. I was astonished actually when she said we could film her being uncomfortable in that way, I guess. But they haven't at the moment. Also, they haven't asked for anything to be removed, so I think that that hasn't actually happened yet, and I think that it has to be it has to be a longer conversation if it does happen. Yeah,
that's one of the best descriptions I've heard of it, of, you know, socially engaged and collaborating, and you're coming at it with some sensitivity, but also, you know, recognizing what you want out of the situation. And it's
and
the
also
same with me as an employer. You know, I'm always struggling to be as clear about as my expectations as possible.
Yeah, and also not being afraid, like,
It's still
I
hard
have
to
to
get
acknowledge my ego in it. There's a reason that there's a reason that I am working as an artist, and I seem to think that I want to make content. Do you know what I mean? Like, that I want to make content to exist in the world. And and I think that often we can shy away from that. But, you know, there's a reason that I want to produce things, and I shouldn't and I need to own that to make things as successful as, well, in my view. Daniel?
Yeah, you there?
Yeah, I am.
Sorry,
Did we both freeze?
The internet dropped out. But
Don't worry, we're back.
yeah, it reminded me of when you were we were talking when we were doing your show about the blue on the screen, and like trying to get this blue paint to match the blue.
Yeah, you've no idea.
The blue plinth to match the blue on the screen, you know, right, which is very hard. Yeah.
It's totally...
Obviously, did anyone notice that? Maybe not, but also it has a big impact on the feeling of it. You know, and your work looks like your work. It's a very strong visual sense, and it, you know, it makes it Phoebe Davies work.
I think that I've worked with Blackshook, who are fantastic, like editing collective, right? Co-op, and James, who's the editor who I work with, who's just brilliant. He actually coloured the work for when we made a navigation with you. Mm-hmm. Coloured that. But poor James has a nightmare with me because I'm so I'm so specific about the way that bodies, you know, the way that we filmed that as well. Like, it's really important for me for there to be a feeling of there to be an aesthetic standard, and then also like a feeling of sweat and those it was extraordinary the first time I went into a wrestling space to see these. So this is, I won't play this because it won't play, Daniel, but this is like an image of the gym that they have, and it was just extraordinary to have this huge visual, like this beautiful installation that is the floor that exists in these spaces. So then knowing that I wanted to make, and the floor that we made for these are some, I'll just whiz you through some stills from the film.
Yeah, we're running out of time.
Yeah, I know.
We've got less than 10 minutes.
Oh God, so I'm sorry that we've been chatting so.
No, not at all.
How much? These are some films of some.
They're tiny little humans, aren't they?
Liv is. This is Liv. She's incredibly strong.
Wow.
And so there are these moments of movement that were just extraordinary to me because they felt so choreographic, I guess, as well. And so this is we had to cancel these, but this was going to be a workshop specifically led by the wrestlers from Norway that has been cancelled, but fingers crossed we'll be able to reorganize. So this floor takes its reference, it's probably important to say, this floor takes its reference from like a few different places, like but one in particular was my work with the physios at Lewisham Hospital, who were running my physio program for me to learn to walk and run again after my ACL. So a lot of the movement-based designs that you're looking at here come from various different reference points from that. with a central mat that is a wrestling mat that can be used in our workshop program too.
Wow.
And I got to blag and work with a brilliant sports flooring provider called Blur Floor.
Is that real? Did you make an actual real floor then?
Yeah, it's a floor. It's not it's not sprung. It's
right.
not sprung, but it's a full floor, so it's not painted. It's a laid floor, and then the lines are painted over the top. And then in some of there's some of my image-based work as well. Yeah, and then these are the wrestling mats that will be used for our public program. They're currently probably just gaining dust.
I really want to go and see it, Phoebe.
Yeah, well, I really want you to. I really would love it if you did. And I know we're probably not going to have time to even get onto the sound. But then, Nandy and I were going to do a movement-based workshop.
Mm-hmm.
So all of this program, which I was so proud of, is on hold. One of the things. Oh, and these are my. So this is an example of the drills I was given to learn for me to be able to get back to running or playing basketball. So this is what this was what some of my movement drills were from. And I think there's a lot of unspoken connections in the work between my mental health state when certain parts of my physicality were taken away from me over the last few years. Mm-hmm. Because there was a direct correspondence between, I think for years I'd been using getting exhausted through sport as a way of leveling my mental health. And so there were these so there were these maps that I was also doing that mapped my and also some data that I was collecting through some of the doctors and therapists I was working with to manage my mental health during this time, that all come into the line design that you see on the floor. And here's some more like lighting changing moments that you'll see. I'm not going to play sound. Oh, and then the other thing that we did do, this was the last event before they shut the gallery, so this was really good, was that Synaptic Island, who are a DJ collective in London, a women and non-binary DJ collective who make space for people to learn to DJ. And they also have a radio show on Resonance, who I work with. They came up and ran a listening session that was in response to rehabilitation and rupture, and that was fantastic. And that was one of the last things we did in the space before it got shut down. And that was really great because it was a way for us to share talk to some other sound collectives up in Sheffield as well, which was really good. So
great.
So that's the site show, and the sound piece is a lot more expansive, but we don't have to talk about that now.
Is the sound piece online?
Not yet, but I think we're making an addition that so the sound piece is built from a series of samples that I have been collecting over the last 2 years whilst in my rehab. So the sound piece is whether that's the echoes of me learning to run again in a gym, or whether that is certain soundscapes collected from certain wrestling moves, or moments of exhaustion. I think it looks a lot at stamina and exhaustion, and then it's cut into this expansive sound piece that again works with the lights to be thrown through the space. And I made that alongside a lot of really exciting sound artists, in particular Joseph Bond, Marie Mallory, Nick Ryan, Tommy from Blackshook. And so we're releasing the sample pack, which means like 50 sounds. We're releasing as an addition, and there'll be probably, I need to make this at the moment, there'll be a 3-minute excerpt of the sound piece, my sound piece, and then Marie and Joe are making new tracks in response to using the sample pack. So the thing that's quite interesting is that will be released as an affordable download, so maybe like we haven't quite decided, but it'll be under a tenner. So you can
Yeah.
buy all of the sounds. And I'm really interested in this idea of like open access music making. So figuring out how you then so anyone can use those sounds to shape like anything they want to make, if that's of interest to them.
Yeah.
And hopefully I'm going to design a USB edition as well. So that's going to come out when I get my shit together at the moment. I don't know when that's going to be. And then the other thing I wanted to just show really quickly was, so this is Nandi, who we spoke about earlier.
Long-time collaborator now.
Long-time collaborator.
Yeah.
Such a phenomenal performer. And this is actually Nandi. We got to do a little bit of a residency at Welcome Collection last year. So this is, and they've got a recording studio, which is amazing. And so we got to have access to like tests and script work we were working on there. But this, but Nans and I got to do some R&D during lockdown, which these were some reference images of our past work. Like a navigation would be that bottom right image that you know very well.
Yeah, we did at DKUK. Yeah,
exactly, with all the blue backgrounds. And some more of Nandi performing and some other performance work that we've made together. And specifically, we were interested in looking at. We've been.
Didn't even get a chance to talk about The Last Dance either.
Oh my God, I know exactly. So there were these Dennis Rodman references that we were using in this R&D, and we specifically were looking at kind of how you articulate rage and how rage sits in the body is something we've been looking at, and we don't know where this work is leading, but we got to work with a phenomenal group of performers. So I just want to make sure that I name check them all. So we're working with Sakima Crook, Valerie Abua, Radzani Malia, I think so you say Radzani surname, Aisha Jordan, Helen Rosell, who worked with us when we did the navigation, Olivia Norris and Connor Scott. And that was fantastic. So we're all working digitally, like over Zoom. And that was we were, I was in Wales. I was in between Wales and London. And then people were in Brighton, Newcastle, I might get that wrong, Newcastle, London, the US as well. And we were making works in response to this. And so these were some of our references that we were thinking about to do with we were trying to really think about visceral human experiences and rage and wrath and anger and where that sits in the body. So we don't know where that's going, but hopefully Nans and I are going to be developing that in the next few years when we get some time together properly.
What we'll have to do is put a link in for everyone's names that you've collaborated with, and then we can sort of share the.
They're fantastic performers. So it felt like
looks like a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was loads of fun, and it was a huge honor to be able to work with them. And these are just some of our mood boards for we were giving in reference.
We're gonna have to leave it there, Phoebe.
That's grand.
Thank you so much. It's like, it was great to
it's really nice to
catch up with you and then hear the progression of the work. And I love the way you bring your life in there, but it's not about you. And it's really interesting to sort of weave the threads together.
Thank you so much, Daniel. And when we're both back in London at the same time, let's try and see each other properly, non-virtually.
Yes, that would be so nice. And let's catch up soon.
All right, take care, hun.
Lots of love.
Later.
Bye. Bye.